member of BAME OT.
Thanks, Anita. Great to have you. Heather.
Hi there, I'm Heather Gray. I'm the Head of Physiotherapy and Paramedicine at Glasgow Caledonian University. I'm also the Chair of the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy's Professional Committee, and I've been involved in research recently across Scotland on student mental wellbeing and the curriculum.
Thanks, Heather. Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm a physio, qualified for about a year, and I'm a member of the First Steps team.
Thanks, Carol. And Lloyd.
Hi, I'm Lloyd Howell. I'm an operating department practitioner, and I am the professional lead and programme lead for the DIPHE in operating department practice and the BSc Honours in operating department practice at Northumbria University.
So many thanks, everyone. It's great to have you here. And as I just mentioned at the beginning, for those of you that might have missed it, this is a student special online support session. And this has been requested by many people from some of the other podcasts that might have worked that were related more to professionals. And we've pulled everyone together from the allied health professions because we do think there's some power in coming together as students, you know, and recognizing that you can get support from other people that just aren't within your own professional group. And really, this is something that we've just been speaking about before we went live. And we do think maybe, you know, now is the time we start recognizing that. And I'm so delighted to have our ODP colleagues on here, because I do feel like sometimes ODPs, because of the nature of their job, are maybe, you know, don't have the opportunity to integrate with other HPs like physios and OTs do. So just setting the scene a little bit there. And what I really want to start with is just talking about what life as a student is like now. So for us on the panel, we went to university many years ago, a lot of us, some maybe not so long ago, like Carol. But I think it's fair to say that all of our experiences are probably very similar in terms of we went to university. For those that lived away from home, you went halls, you had that student life. And for students at university at this moment in time, it's just not what we class as normal. So Leisha, I'm going to come to you first, because you are in a university where all of your education now is online, virtual. What's that like?
So for me at the moment, all of our theory is taught online through pre-recorded PowerPoints and videos, and then some live seminars in the week where we can discuss with our tutors the content that we've gone over in time for that seminar, and work on case studies and things like that. And then we have a couple of days a month on campus to catch up on the practical skills that go with the theory that we've covered online. So I think it's quite easy for students to be a bit discouraged by having to learn online, especially when you may not be with your peers unless you were to live with them in a flat or a house, for example, in student accommodation. And it can be quite difficult to kind of study completely independently, especially coming out of first year where it's like very guided, and it still is. But it is quite challenging trying to get used to going through things completely independently and in your own time. Although I do think there is a silver lining to this, because being able to study the pre-recorded things online enables you to kind of go through it at your own pace and learn as you go. Which I think is really helpful, because then, well, that for me has allowed me to apply it better in the live seminars and the practicals. So I think that's been the biggest thing about that so far at the moment.
Now, I'm just going to be totally honest here. I am a terrible procrastinator, and I have been. I can't work from home very well because I'll find every job to do before I do that bit of academic piece. I'm still like that now. That's why I'm not a researcher. So do you have to be incredibly more motivated to do this type of learning? You know, do you have to be really prepared, and do you find it's harder? You have to have more self-motivation because you're not stood there in front of someone surrounded by people who are also learning.
Yeah, I think that can definitely be a challenge. Although for me, I've kind of made myself a bit of a timetable. So obviously we have like the scheduled live seminars that we have to work around in order to be prepared for those, which does really help because it kind of gives us a deadline that you can work towards. But I do think that having a good level of motivation and like time management skills really helps, because helps you prioritize like what sort of content you need to get through first and by when, and then helps you identify which areas you might need to spend more time on, especially if they're like longer PowerPoints or longer videos that for me, I pause it like every 5 seconds to write notes down. So it takes me quite a while. So now that I'm aware of it, and like I'm used to kind of how I'm doing it now, having done it for a few weeks now, I kind of know how much time to allow to get things done in preparation for the seminars. And then by the time practical comes around, I find it's just kind of like reviewing the theory from the previous week. So I allow time for that prior to the practical too. So I think it's kind of just finding what works for you and finding a time of the day where you feel most productive. I think I tend to be more productive like in the evenings, afternoons, evenings. And then if I need to do anything else, then I'll do that around like my studies, if that makes sense. But I've also made sure to make time for like exercise and like dance classes and things that I enjoy in the evening, just to break it up a bit. Otherwise, I think it can get a bit overwhelming and a bit time consuming, just constantly sat at your desk at home or in your student accommodation or whatever, trying to get through it by yourself. So I think balance is definitely key.
Goodness, well, there's some top tips in there already, Leisha, isn't there? Like, I want to be your friend if I'm ever studying, I'm telling you, I want to be your roommate. Heather, I'm going to come to you. So a lot of the student anxieties we've had through is around learning styles and just students feeling they just can't get into this online style of learning, and they're really challenged and they're really anxious about it. I mean, Nisha's given us some great tips there. I mean, from your end as a lecturer, from someone delivering the education, have you got any tips or thoughts on that?
Oh, I totally have sympathies for the students, hearing Leisha speak there, 10 out of 10 for your strategies for like dealing with it. Because I think that the main difficulty for a lot of students, and particularly I feel, in particular for the new students coming onto programs who don't know anybody in the first place, it's different if you're in your second or third or fourth year in Scotland anyway. You already know people, but the main thing that we're finding the difficulty with is the generating a sense of belonging when you're not really seeing people, because not even everybody on an online platform maybe has the bandwidth to even put on the camera at times, so you're not even seeing what people look like, which makes it particularly difficult. So I would say to students, any opportunities that there are for smaller pieces of group work or getting together with peers or making use of other kind of modes that they have available to them for socialization. And maybe even, maybe students who are maybe a bit more introvert and think, well, I don't really need that socialization. I still encourage them to do that, because you're going to need these peers to help support you through your program. Also, I know that, the students' associations and student unions are also doing other extracurricular things and events to try and help promote the sense of belonging, socialization. So it's kind of encouraging people to make use of those things as well, not just to get too caught up in their studies. Leisha was obviously saying about her dancing. Yep, absolutely. Carry on with things that are, engaging you in other activities apart from just studying.
Thanks, Heather. Now, Tony, I'm going to come down to you, because I can only imagine thinking of the nature of your studies, and I'm going to link it into the practical side in a moment, but what specific challenges have you found?
Well, obviously we got pulled out of placement in March because of COVID. So from March till September, I was homeschooling and doing university online studies. So it was trying to juggle between doing online studies and the kids, getting them homeschooled. So it was quite difficult, but I find it really hard working off a computer. I like to be hands-on, and that's how I learn. Like I learn through seeing it. So it has been, I have found it difficult. I would do my schedule like Leisha, but sometimes it just didn't work.
Yeah. And it's always going to be a bit harder with little ones running around for sure. Totally get that. Leisha, can I come back to you, please, for a comment?
Yeah, just something to add to what Heather was saying. We as a physio society at my uni are really trying to encourage the new first years to get involved with things that we're doing, whether it be like an online social event or like say a guest speaker, just so that they have an opportunity to connect with students in other years as a support network. So I think that's quite helpful to encourage. And I've personally spoken to a couple of the new first years and just really encouraged them to try and get to know the other people on their course, even if it's like via group chats or online, and obviously like when they're hopefully on campus for practicals, because I think being able to go through it together is really, really valuable. So I'd definitely back that up and encourage that.
Thank you, Leisha. Now, Amelia, I'm going to come on to you next to talk about placements, because I know you've had a virtual placement, and this is the other side. So it's about education, the delivery of education and learning, but there's also the practical elements as AHPs. So do you want to tell us about your experiences of virtual placement?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to do a virtual placement, which I don't know, I love technology, so I was quite excited about that. I know some students would be like, oh no, this seems like my worst nightmare, but I loved it. You also have to have like those practical hands-on skills. You can't just substitute that with a virtual placement, but it's a good alternative. And I know a lot of physios and a lot of professions, solely their job is phone-based anyway. So I know it's like an applicable skill that physios do use in the real world. So I definitely didn't feel like I wasn't getting as much learning, and I got to try like different things that other people hadn't done before. So I found that really exciting to be like at the forefront of this use of technology. So yeah, there's pros and cons, but I found it quite enjoyable. So I would encourage students to be open to trying different types of placements, because you might not get that traditional placement within this environment. Or I know some of my friends have done like 2 days in practice or 3 days in practice, then a couple of days studying at home. So it's, it's like having a mix of those things and just trying alternative placements or more realistic placements within this pandemic. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think we are where we are. So I'm going to come to Leah for some comments on virtual placement, but there's a double-edged sword with the placements. And I know Anita's going to come on. We're going to come to Anita as well to have some pointers around this, but it's everything. It's not just the pandemic, isn't it? It's the new social distancing, it's space, it's and actually the online virtual platform probably gives you more time and more interaction with your educator than potentially being, in a hospital at the moment as well. So Leah, what's your experiences?
So I have just finished a virtual placement a couple of weeks ago. It was with Public Health England, and it was really interesting. It was completely 100% virtual though, with no patients. So when it was in pairs, so when me and the person I was working with was told this, we were obviously quite nervous, and how is this going to add to our course? We'd recently, just before the placement, done a module about applied health improvement. So we'd touched upon public health and the role of AHPs, not only OTs, but AHPs as a whole, their role in public health. But I feel like the virtual placement really drilled home all the different skills that OTs can use. I also feel as though a lot of the placements, obviously within practice, had sort of left me thinking, well, obviously the only place I can go now is practice, and maybe at some point I can go into research, or I could do this later on. But I feel like my public health placement really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that it could be a more strategic role as well. So if anybody has found themselves with a similar placement and are understandably quite nervous, just sort of backing up what Amelia said about keep an open mind, because it might be the best one that you've done.
And it's contacts, isn't it? Sometimes it teaches you about networks and and how to extend your kind of contact list at a student level, and that is so important because it'll open up opportunities you might never have had. So yes, I'm a complete believer in that. Now, Anita, coming to you again from a placement perspective now, as an educator, you know, I remember being back in March and we having students on placement, and we just keep continuing, we're continuing the placement till we knew we had to then stop. So there was those students, and there were students actually that that ended up staying on during the pandemic and being employed by trusts, because to put it quite bluntly, the death in service became very relevant and important. So students were then employed to be, you know, support workers during the pandemic. So, but they weren't students. So I think that we couldn't class them as student placement. So from a you know, lecturer perspective, where are you coming from with the virtual placements, the opportunities, what actually happened during that pandemic? Because we know a lot of students have told me they were affected, being pulled from their placements immediately, not being able to complete them, feeling like this sense of abandonment, because students do get attached to their placements. So I've asked you a lot of questions there, but yeah, I mean, what do you think?
I think what really came to head was this word agile working, and I think it's an essential skill now that AHPs will have to have, and virtual technology is part of agile working. So, you know, doing your notes on a computer in your car, not going back to the office, working from pubs perhaps, or your cafes if you're allowed to, working differently. I think that was it. And I think the pandemic moved us 10 years forward. And I think what the skills the students have acquired are really, really ahead of their time. I mean, they're trailblazers, really, when you hear about the things they've been doing. And I've done a lot of work about trying to get practitioners to use virtual technology in their practice. But suddenly when we had COVID, everyone was like, yeah, we can do this. And just hearing the students' attitudes about this, you can really feel that sense of progress and innovation and really imagination. And I think that's really, really fantastic. And I think this is an opportunity really to see it as an innovative time for you as students and for us as educators, and really think about the new skills that we actually have to work virtually, how our patients perceive it. If you think about hand clinics going virtually, I mean, they're absolutely amazing. You know, why do you have to go back to working as what we did before? So I think it's a really, really good opportunity for HPs to really reevaluate what we're doing, why we're doing it, and change in practice for a good way, but bearing in mind we do still need to ask patients how they perceive what we're actually doing. And I think that's a piece of work that needs to be done too. So and I think the pandemic, I think students were extremely courageous to make those decisions, either to work as support workers, to make the decision that it wasn't for them, or to continue with their studies. And I think AHP students really, really should believe in themselves, that whatever decision you made or are making, it takes courage to make a decision. So as an educator, you know, you had all of our respect and admiration in the way that you managed yourselves during this very, very difficult time.
Thanks, Anita. And Heather, I'm going to come down to you for a good point, please.
Yeah, no, picking up on what Anita was saying there about different ways of working, us not going back to old ways of working, etc. Something that we've been saying to our students, if you think about the pillars of practice, you've got like 4 different pillars of practice. You've got your clinical pillar of practice, and traditionally, certainly I'm mainly speaking from physiotherapy here, but traditionally we've focused on placements. We're always mainly tackling the clinical pillar of practice, but it's equally as legitimate for placements to tackle the research pillar, the learning and development pillar, and the leadership pillar. And I think it's fantastic now that students are getting opportunities in these other kind of pillar areas, so to speak, because if you think about them developing through their careers, post-registration, working up into advanced practice posts or wherever else they want to go, they can't just stick to one pillar, you know. So, you know, it's great now that we're getting more opportunities to address all these pillars, you know, broader perspectives of practice at the pre-registration level than ever we had before. So I think it's just really giving students the the confidence that these are legitimate areas in which to work. Whereas I think they feel that, oh no, if it's not a clinical placement, it's kind of a bit second rate, which is definitely not the case. And I think that's one key message I would like to get out there.
Thank you, Heather. That's really important. Now, Lloyd, I'm coming to you next, up there in Newcastle, and you have had challenges, it's fair to say, within your university. So the first challenge you had was a cyber attack, cyber crisis that you're still recovering from, and the second was, around COVID. So can you tell us firstly a little bit about the cyber problems you've had, which I can no doubt be very difficult when you're delivering virtual models of education?
Well, absolutely, Rachel. It was, as if COVID wasn't bad enough, and having to cope with that, to then have to cope with the cyber crisis on top was particularly challenging. And I would give a huge shout out to the IT team at Northumbria, because they've been absolutely brilliant. We went from having no emails or anything like that. The whole e-learning platform was down. Everything's back up now. There are still some issues, but we've recovered. I've got to say, we weren't the only institution. Our neighbours in Newcastle had a similar problem, and everybody just had to kind of dig deep and get on with it and do the best that we possibly could. The one thing that kept us going, I think, throughout was Microsoft Teams. And it's funny, isn't it? I think that, throughout the pandemic, we've seen adverts for Microsoft Teams and Zoom and whatever on the, and nationally. And I think certainly the whole of the teaching staff, and also a lot of the students, we've very quickly become much more adept at using such platforms, because it's the only thing that we were able to use, and then trying to explore every possible thing that you can do with that particular platform. So what can you deliver with it? How do you communicate? How can you you can communicate with your colleagues on campus, but then how do you invite external speakers, etc.? So there have been challenges. There have been some steep learning curves, but we've managed to get over that. And I'd like to say, as I say, we're just about back on track, but it has been pretty tough. And I do take my hat off to the students as well, because they've been absolutely brilliant in being patient, especially with those of us who weren't particularly IT adept of a certain age, so yeah, that has been challenging. As far as the sorry, what was your other query?
Well, I'm just going to take the opportunity to come down to Leanne, because I can see her smiling really brightly there, and I'm not going to put you on the spot here. I can only imagine Lloyd and the team are incredible support for you as students, but from your perspective, what's it been like? And what have you, I suppose, your lecturer team done that has been really supportive?
It was just a bit of a, it felt, I think from us, from a student point of view, it sort of felt like what else could go wrong. So we all went in a massive panic, first, obviously we got pulled out of placement, and then the cyber attack happened, but we've been consistent the whole way through. It's really difficult because everybody's got a different worry, everyone's coming from a different, everyone's thinking about something different, and it's all just been thrown at Lloyd and the rest of the team, and they've kept us afloat, definitely. But we've also had a really good laugh, I think, through a lot of it. Like Lloyd said, we're learning about new platforms, and that's kind of lightened the mood a little bit. The cyber attack for us came, I think it was probably about a month before we were due to go back into placement, maybe it's even 3 weeks. So all of a sudden, these plans that were kind of coming into place, and we were thinking, okay, we're going to get back into placement, it's going to be all right. We're just we went from all this communication to not having anything. So that caused a lot of anxiety with us all, but they found other ways for us to contact them. And so, yeah, I think we would have been lost without the team that we've had, without being too gushy.
I think that's really nice to hear, and I think just those relationships that exist, I think obviously some of the people that have reached out maybe don't have that, so it's like, how can they start to either address that or find support networks within? So so thanks, Leanne, that's super nice to hear, and sure, music to your ears, Lloyd. But
absolutely.
the second point was around a huge anxiety of students at the moment, is COVID, understandably. And we've seen, you know, particular universities, so MMU, Northumbria, which have had COVID outbreaks, had led to students being, you know, isolated in huge numbers. So, I mean, how has that affected? It's probably a bit of a silly question, but how has that affected, you know, your student population and also the educators as well? Because I can imagine that can be, you know, quite a stressful time for you guys as well.
It has been stressful, and I mean, you know, if you look at the local or national news footage, you know, we've seen all kinds of problems on various campuses. I think for us, and I'm sure it's the same from a colleague up in Glasgow and nationally, it's about the university making sure that the students are supported as much as they possibly can be. I think one of the things that's really, really important is communication, and trying to make sure that you keep the students informed at every step of the way regarding what's happening. It might not be that what's happening is particularly good, but I think that there's a lot to be said for just making sure students are informed. I think that with the current outbreaks, I think that the students do realise, the majority of students do realise it's not our fault. You know, we have been put in this position, it's not of our choosing, and what we have to do is to try and make sure that they feel as supported as possible. When we think about actual teaching and education, as I say, we've had to modify the way we've delivered our sessions, and there certainly have been restrictions on things like face-to-face teaching. But what we have to do is, as far as the teaching sessions go, we try and make them, and I'm sure my other colleagues do as well, we try and make them as interactive as possible, where we are doing seminars or online teaching. So as well as using recordings, I think there is a lot to be said about actually logging on to whatever platform you're using for teaching and actually speaking to the students face to face. And the chat bar normally goes mad down the right hand side, but I think that's a good thing, because again we are communicating, and I'm sure that they do the same thing at other institutions as well. But I do think, as I say, for me, communication is key, making sure that you let people know exactly what you're going to do. We can't always follow through with our promises, but at least if they know that we're trying, I think that's really important.
No,
Yeah.
I think that's such a good point. And I mentioned before about a couple of sessions I've done for universities that I don't think I'd ever would have been asked. I mean, it was around like the Nightingale and things, but and I'm sure I was a bit of a stopgap, like plugging in for sessions. But you're absolutely right. The students loved it because it was just something different, and it opens up an opportunity to invite people in that you normally wouldn't invite onto a paramedic undergraduate program. Like, what can I teach a paramedic? But it's around leadership and all those other things. So I think, Lloyd, that's a good point. And sometimes the students reach out. So the students said, "Oh, we've got this open session. We've got this open afternoon, or it's like elective stuff. Will you come and do X, Y, or Z?" So for the students out there that are listening, and you do maybe need a little bit of a motivator or something different, like reach out to some people that inspire you on social media or that you might follow, or, you know, like Lloyd said, if it's something that's just, you want an opportunity to learn about something that's totally unrelated to your undergraduate program, like this is the time where you ask, like anything goes in COVID. So yeah, I think, Lloyd, that's a great point. Now, Heather, one of the reasons you're on this panel is because you have done some fantastic work around student mental well-being, and you come very highly recommended from my friend John Hammond. So I want to just ask your thoughts on this, because on a much more serious note, a lot of students are having mental health problems, and there's a whole spectrum of that, from feeling anxious, from fearful, to really, feeling depressed. So I suppose one of the things that I want to say as a manager is they are normal feelings, number one, in this time. They are normal feelings and it's good to talk about them. But I'm coming to you with your research education hat on, Heather, for any comments or advice for students.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about some of the stats that we had, because I've been involved in these, research projects for the past few years. So pre-COVID, we had a situation where 1 in 4 students in the UK was experiencing a mental health difficulty. So that was pre-COVID. We know that figure's much higher now. And we also know that post-COVID, we've got, recent research that's saying about 83% of those who had maybe a mental health condition beforehand are experiencing a worsening of that. And the other things that are coming through as well is isolation-induced loneliness, which we kind of, alluded to earlier. People sitting in their own rooms all the time in front of their computer. And, on a very serious note, loneliness, prolonged loneliness, is also a suicide risk as well. And this age group, generally, the student body is at an age, where they are already in a kind of higher risk of suicide as well, So it is very, very important about the keeping in contact, with the students, and as we mentioned earlier, about having their networks of support. And some of the work that we were doing was with our actual mental wellbeing services, and we were asking them, what are the main academic or study-related factors that students might come to you with? And I don't know what things might come to the top of your head when you think about that, but the top thing that students were talking about was group work. So we know that group work is a major stressor for students, so much so that some of them are ending up at counselling services because of it. So now we've got online group work as well. Placement-related stresses, where that was another high factor. I think we can definitely imagine all the stresses round about placement, particularly at the moment. Other stressors related to actual staff themselves having poor attitudes to mental health and perhaps not believing students, but I think nowadays with all the press, I think maybe that one's not quite so much the case. I think most people do believe that there are problems quite legitimately. Quantity and quality of feedback to students was another stressor, and the isolation that we've already said. So, these are main areas that universities need to really think about, and even more so now when we've got the online, the lack of the face-to-face in relation to, the group work, the management of placements, providing regular feedback, keeping the communication channels going. And I suppose I'm saying that to the educator's side, but from the student's side, don't be afraid to speak up and ask for help. And if you're not happy with how group work is organised or happening, speak out, feel empowered to speak out. If you feel you're not getting enough feedback or the right type of feedback or the right amount of feedback, again, speak up, use all the communication channels that you have available to you, which includes personal tutors, student reps, module leads, programme leads, head of departments, student services, the whole lot, empower people to actually use them and not be afraid. And another thing as well, just to kind of throw in here without speaking too much, is that a lot of students, especially healthcare students, do suffer from a bit of maladaptive perfectionism at times as well. I think I do as well, to be honest. So, I think as well, especially in everyday normal life, we probably need to tone down the perfectionism that perhaps a lot of us have, but particularly now, just, trying to reduce expectations. We can't expect everything to be, fantastic, running smoothly, running on time, running perhaps to this standard we think it should be, the standard it was pre-March or whatever. So just, giving yourself a big fat break sometimes is what I say to myself, just let some things go. The world's not going to fall apart if things aren't the same standard they were before. So a lot of it is, how we speak to ourselves and giving ourselves a break as well. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Oh, God, Heather, I could honestly listen to you all day. I mean, that is just fascinating, and there's never a truer word spoken about ask for help. And the thing is, if you're feeling something genuinely like that, if something doesn't feel right or look right, like you said, the group work, someone else is feeling it too. And just speaking out and saying it can not just help yourself, but others. Now, Anita, I know you were nodding along there because you feel really strongly about this as well, isn't it? Like, give yourself a break, give us a break, What are your thoughts?
I think there's some really valid points, and I think for me the biggest concern is loneliness in young people, and I think we know, particularly with teenagers, that it's a bigger problem actually than perhaps in older adults. We forget that young people are actually suffering normally pre-COVID from social isolation as well, and we're just exacerbating it through the use of technology and through these virtual worlds. So I sometimes think we have to be kind to ourselves as well. We have to think about other strategies that we might be able to use. Things like picking up the telephone, this alien thing of actually speaking to people rather than texting people, thinking about strategies, thinking about how we manage our own well-being as well, I think becomes really, really important. I think some of the students mentioned activities, continuing as much as possible with life as normal. This idea of asking for help, I think, particularly for healthcare professionals, is really difficult for healthcare professionals, I think, to say, I'm feeling a bit sad, I'm feeling worried, I'm feeling anxious, and actually then trying to work out, are those feelings normal, or are they actually got to the point where I actually do need to seek support from student services, or actually need to seek support from a healthcare professional? And I think it's so important that we acknowledge how we feel, and we talk about how we feel. And I think I can't say that enough, that all of us, I think, through COVID, have some point felt, I've had enough. This is awful. And if it's a prolonged feeling, then you really, really must seek help for those kinds of feelings, whether or not you talk to your personal tutor, you talk to whoever within a university or a flatmate. It's so important not to dismiss how you're feeling. And I also say to students as well, is that we expect patients to tell us how they feel when we ask them. And it's exactly the same way as we have a responsibility to ourselves as well, actually, to look after ourselves and be kind to ourselves and to be kind to each other. And I think that's a really important message, is that kindness, I think COVID has really taught us to be kind. Sending a little bar of chocolate to your friend, or saying, how are you? Or thank you, or I've been thinking about you. I think they've become really, really important.
Yeah, the small things matter. Now, Heather, we know from the research and definitely from some of your comments that there's particular groups that are more impacted by poor mental well-being. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that for us, please, and where people can reach out to?
Yeah, so we've got a situation where, students in general, might be suffering from poor mental well-being, and then it being exacerbated in the current pandemic. But there also are, groups in society with protected characteristics as well, who, also even before any pandemic would be, feeling more isolated perhaps than, others. So, the BAME population, for example, and LGBTQ plus population as well, in communities. Prior to all this, the research holds out that they are more likely to feel, underrepresented, isolated, maybe, different from other people around about them, not wanting to speak out, feeling that maybe even the materials that we're teaching and the case studies that we're using aren't representing them, and their needs, and etc. So, we've got to be aware that things are not on an equal playing field for everybody, and obviously everybody's different as well as to how they react to situations, but we already have other communities in particular that, I suppose I'm just flagging up to students and to academic staff to maybe even, more so look out for as well.
I completely agree. That's such a great point. And for anyone listening to this this live stream, on this same channel, we do have a number of podcasts specifically for different communities. So we'll have LGBTQI plus podcasts, we have podcasts from BAME, AHPs, and also some intersectionality podcasts as well. So please do reach out, because all of the speakers on those podcasts have their Twitter handles, and they're more than happy you reach out to them if you just want to reach out to, you know, a friendly face. So please don't feel like you're alone. So I'm going to move to Carol in 1 second to take the floor as Physio Matters First Steps, but just want to follow on from Heather and Anita's points there, coming to two of our students. How do you make friends in this virtual world? So take, you know, that first year, how do you even start to get those relationships? Leah, can I come to you first?
Yeah, so we, as part of our course, because I think maybe it's primarily because we're the postgrad course, they're a lot smaller than a lot of the bachelor's courses are. I mean, there's 13 in my cohort, and then the year below, I think there's only sort of 20 compared to other cohorts that all have, you know, hundreds. So I feel that's definitely worked in our favour in one way, because we're a little bit more close-knit. But our society have been quite active, especially during the pandemic, setting up Teams meetings, and not just things like chinwags and checking up, see how placements go in, but kind of more social nights. So we had a show and tell one night, we had a dance where we all got to submit some songs for a playlist. And I'd say if you go to a university where there's an active society, definitely take them up on the offer of the things that they've planned. If maybe the society isn't so active, see either if you're in a place where, you know, you're able to set something up, even if it is just send out a Teams invite for one evening, definitely do it, because I'm sure it's not just you who's feeling a little bit isolated from the group and like you don't belong. Otherwise, Twitter, I think I found quite a few people on Twitter. If you just put a tweet out there and say, you know, hi, there's a big community there, and I feel it's quite easy to make a friend, especially now while a lot of people are on there.
Oh, that's so nice, Leah. I love that. I'm sure there's like, yeah, I just makes friends on these podcasts. Just want to be your friend. Leisha, coming to you next, and then we'll go on to Carol for some open floor questions to get prepared panel.
Yeah, so I totally agree with Leah, getting involved with your society, or any society, whether it be your academic one for your course or one for a sport or a hobby that you enjoy. I know there's a new society at our uni of like self-care society, which I think has been quite popular, especially during this time. But no matter what the society, if you're interested in it, I definitely encourage you to get involved. Great way to meet new people, and especially if you get involved with the one on your course, like I said earlier, to meet students from different year groups, because I've personally found that to be a great support network, because they've experienced everything that you're going through now, maybe minus the pandemic, but other academic things, definitely. And I'd also say, like, one of our modules is mixed with podiatry students and IoT students. So I've found that like quite a nice way to meet people and start conversations with students on other courses. So that could be another way. Yeah. Thank you so much. Carol, the floor's yours. Please take over.
Okay, so I've been monitoring questions, if you're wondering why my eyes keep darting away, throughout, and we've had some great questions through. So one of them is, which I'm sure some of our students who have children can say, is the worry about the kind of bubble situation, and if your child becomes ill, is that going to impact your ability to go on placement or your ability to fit a placement in time? And also just managing placement hours generally is kind of a big concern that's popping up, and people feeling like they might not qualify or that they might have to extend their time. So what's people's thoughts on that?
Anyone want to kick off with answering that? Yep, Heather?
Yeah, placements and trying to make sure students get back on placement, get the appropriate placement hours and get the right types and breadth of placements. Yeah, this is what keeps me awake at night, certainly, trying to get this sorted out. But, you know, I think to try and reassure students that, you know, this is a global problem. This is not even a UK problem. This is a global problem to start off with. So, you know, everybody is aware of this. So this is, you know, HCPC, professional bodies, all the unis, practice educators, the NHS. So, you know, everybody is absolutely trying to be as creative as possible in trying to find solutions for this. And at least with the, you know, the virtual placements, etc., and these other kind of non-patient facing placements, project-based placements, PEEP placements, whatever acronym you want to think of placements, you know, we've got all sorts of things going on. So, you know, everybody's working as hard as they can, and people understand the situation. I understand the students' anxieties. Yes, 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 absolutely. I've got lots of anxieties. Our team have got lots of anxieties about this, but everyone is doing their best to try and get students over the line in time, and also thinking about things like recognition of prior learning as well, because quite a lot of students have maybe had, you know, jobs in healthcare environments or care environments. There are loads and loads of transferable skills that you've developed there that you might be able to use as part of a recognition of prior learning claim, you know, to count towards your placement hours, or instead of a placement. That's things that we've been working with our student as well. So, you know, we're now in a situation where a few weeks ago I was really concerned that we were going to get nobody over the line, to thinking now that actually it looks like we probably will get, you know, most people over the line in time, because there are lots of creative solutions. And, you know, the universities are doing everything they can. Everybody really is doing everything they can. So and we've been lobbying as well professional bodies, because I know in physiotherapy it's 1,000 hours, a lot of professions 1,000 hours, it might be 500 hours, whatever it is. So as well, professional bodies aren't being maybe as rigid in that and the counting of the hours, because think about the learning outcomes. Have you achieved the learning outcomes and the competencies that you would require, you know, to be safe and employable? Okay, at the end of the day, hopefully you're not going to kill anybody, you know, so can we let you out, you know, out the end? And the answer is probably yes. So hang in there, folks.
Thank you. Lloyd?
Yeah, I would just kind of back up what Heather said and say that certainly during this period, there's been a lot more collaboration between the universities and practice, and the practice educators and the mentors and the practice supervisors, in making sure that they're aware that, first of all, the anxieties that the students have regarding what happens if this happens, what happens if the placement falls, what happens if we get pulled out of practice, but also about kind of trying to make sure that they're aware of the fact that the challenges that the students have had, and being kind of cognizant of that when they're actually in practice, and when they're supporting them, and when they're assessing them, just so that's kind of taken into consideration. But certainly there is, I think that I'd like to, you know, just to reassure students that there is a lot of conversation and collaboration that goes on between the universities and clinical placements to make sure that they're supported when they're out there.
Great, thanks for those answers. One student has asked that, given the fact it's so difficult and people put lots of expectations on ourselves, perfectionism, I can hand on heart say, Heather, is me too, so don't worry, is saying that actually those of us in clinical practice, can we remind all those students struggling from time to time what we love about our jobs, because actually reminding them why they're doing this would be really helpful. So I don't mind getting going. I love the fact that my job's ever changing. It's never boring. I get to spend as much time with patients, you know, as I feel they need. And actually, quite often the skills I learned from uni, which wasn't really that long ago, really helped me to understand what a patient's key problems are. And you really feel like you've done something to make that person's quality of life better.
Anita, did you want to come in there, or?
What I love about my job, people call OTs occupational terrorists. So what I love about my job is the fact that I make changes, and I think and you see visible change, and that's what re-ablement and rehab's all about. And I love that. I love the fact that when you go in, you can make a little bit. I mean, even the fact when somebody can fasten their bra or pull on their pants, you think, yes, you know, that's part of that quality of life. So I think that's what I really love about my job. I love the fact that we make a difference, and small changes I think are really, really important. You know, you don't always see the massive steps. I think the physios, you see it too when you get somebody out of bed for the first time and the first steps are made. It's those little bits, I think. It's those humane bits. And I think COVID has made it even more important for me anyway. I mean, I love the fact when I used to brush somebody's hair, or you sit them out in their chair and they look fabulous, or they're dressed and the hairdressers come. And it's just those little bits, I suppose, that make us human, isn't it? As I always say to students, can you imagine not washing your hair for a week? And yet when people go into hospital, that's what might happen to them. So as a AHP, you might actually work outside your scope of practice and actually go and help the nurse to go and give somebody a bath and wash their hair and make them feel fabulous. So that's what makes, I think that's what I love about my job anyway. I think once I stop losing that, it's the time to give up.
Great, Anita. Another question we've had is, any tips for disabled students who may be in a vulnerable group for COVID and are concerned they'll be left behind in their peers, particularly if a placement isn't quite as accessible to them, or online learning makes it harder for them to access?
Do we want to go to one of the educators? I actually have a couple of comments about this, but does any of the panel want to come in there? Lloyd?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, as with any other student, the process would be that an occupational health assessment would be carried out and reasonable adjustments would be made to make sure that the student wasn't disadvantaged. And that would be kind of probably the line we would take with any student in that situation. And we've certainly had some students who due to health reasons have had to isolate, for example, and all we do is adapt the program to suit and try and reassure them that the program will still be there when they're ready to come back. I think that's really, really important.
So I would echo that from a clinical management perspective, like the other end of student education. And the reality is there will be students, staff that need to self-isolate or shield again in this second wave, third wave, fourth wave, however many we're going to have. That's a reality of a global pandemic, and people should not bear the guilt of that. It's circumstantial. People have long-term conditions and they shouldn't be discriminated against because of that. And that's a really important word to use, because if students feel like they are, then they probably are. So if you feel like you're being discriminated against, chances are you are. And that's when you need to reach out to your other students, to your, you know, your societies, and then of course, professional, you know, if you've got your professional networks as well for students. So if you are a student who is currently in that situation, you cannot focus too much on that, because we don't know what this next stage of the pandemic looks like. There is no end point at the moment, but there will be an end point. We know this from other crises and other pandemics that we've been through. So, you know, I want to reassure you that your feelings of anxiety around this are normal, and there is support out there for you. And that, as Lloyd said, there will be reasonable adjustments made so you can fulfill your undergraduate program to the best of your ability that is, you know, suitable for you. So as educators in placement, again, we have a responsibility to make that happen as well. And what we're seeing is, for when the third years were qualifying just before September, people did pull together and people did make the placements happen. So please don't stress too much. We can only imagine what it's like. There was a question around social bubbles. Again, if you're told to self-isolate because your child's had a contact within their bubble, that's just the way it is. We're dealing with those staff. In my organisation, we've got 40, 50 staff members off at the minute, self-isolating with no symptoms, because that's what we have to do. So please don't worry, please don't sweat about it. Be productive as you can with children running around. It's really hard, I know that. But like the webinars, the podcasts, the online pre-recorded stuff, everything Leisha said. So yeah, hope that's helpful. Carol, next question.
Next question is, any tips for getting in contact with students outside of your particular profession? As some people are finding that with online learning, they've kind of ended up almost in like a very if I can get my words out tonight, profession specific bubble, and don't feel like they've necessarily had that exposure to, you know, ODPs or OTs or kind of each other and other professions. Amelia, sounds like you've got something to say.
Yeah, I was just thinking from a first steps point of view, like we would welcome anyone to get involved with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever the hell it is. Just if you want to know more about physio, like watch our videos, chat to us, anything like that. We want it to be like a safe space for people to ask any questions. So from any profession, like even a student who's just worried, just get involved with us as much as you can. Also the Physio Matters podcast as well. But, you know, yeah, that's all I've got to say. But yeah, want it to be a good community, especially in these sort of times. So
I was going to say, Leanne, did you look like you wanted to add something?
I would just say, like, probably I would agree with that. From coming from our point of view, like Lloyd has said before, as ODPs, our group is really quite small and we have very little interaction with the larger groups at the university. So there is actually very little between us, and I don't know about Tony, but I for one would certainly welcome a bit more integration between them. So I would say definitely, if anybody's wanting to reach out to another group, then just do it, because I've thought it. I don't know about Tony, but I reckon probably a lot of the rest of our year also would welcome just another point of view, even, or to be able to ask someone else's opinion from their side of things if you're in a particular situation. So I would say definitely do it. I've written that down. I don't know whether like, but yeah, definitely.
Definitely. And so I can speak a little bit from a clinician point of view and someone who didn't kind of leave uni that long ago and is a rotational physio. Actually go and see what each other do. So if you are on a face-to-face placement, there's nothing wrong with saying to an educator, can I go and spend a day with a speech and language therapist? Can I go spend a day shadowing someone else? It teaches you clinical skills and it makes your referrals to them so much better. So I'll issue one last question, is that one person has sort of asked and sort of floated the idea as to say, kind of in terms of managing core placements or core areas that people tend to worry about, or maybe were quite focused on when they applied to their degree or their kind of undergrad course. Has anyone kind of got worries about those, or feels like in a position where they feel like they might be sort of at a disadvantage when it comes to applying for a job?
I personally, just because I've got a few more health problems, a bit worried about doing a respiratory placement. So I don't know how I'm going to complete my degree and get that necessary experience. So the other areas I can sort of make adjustments in, but that's the area I'm most worried about. And yeah, I think that's my main thing, and just like what the jobs are going to look like when I do graduate. But obviously I'm mainly worried about getting through the next couple of weeks, and that can wait for once I've managed to actually qualify. But yeah, those are my sort of thoughts on the topic.
From an ODP side of things, from the start we've been in different areas. So I'm in anaesthetic area now, which is fantastic, but obviously we need to do with second year placements in the same places where we were. Like we've still got the scrub side and the anaesthetic side and the recovery side to do in second year. So it's getting through the next 6 weeks to then start your 2 placements, that's worrying as well.
I was just going to say that maybe a bit of myth busting needs to go on though, maybe as well, just hearing Amelia speak there, because maybe need to look back at what the professional bodies actually look for you becoming a physio, an occupational therapist, or whatever it is, because you don't necessarily need to do a respiratory placement to become a physiotherapist, is what I was going to say there. So I think there's maybe a bit of looking back at what is actually required to get over the line into the profession as well. Throwing the cat amongst the pigeons there, maybe delete that bit.
No, I completely agree. It takes all sorts, and it goes back to, I think, Carol's point, wasn't it, around grades. So students are so fixated with getting a first or a 2-1 or a 2-2 or whatever. And I literally scraped by the skin of my teeth with exams and things. And I was just very, very good at being a clinician. I just wasn't very good at articulating it or writing, doing research stuff. So, and I've not done too bad. So, I can't even speak proper. So, on that note, we're always like the panel to have the last word. So I'm just going to go around in just a top tip or a motivational comment for all the students out there. We can all be reached online via social media, via YouTube. Drop me a line and we'll hook anyone up with any of these people on the podcast. I really mean that. So Leisha, going to you.
I think the main things I'd say is just stick at it from a student point of view. It'll all be worth it in the end, and always reach out for help and support if you need it. So that's my little message.
Thank you. Amelia?
We're all in the same boat. So yeah, make sure you reach out. You're not alone. It's hard, but we're all in the same boat. So.
Leah?
Find where the mute button is. But also, yeah, again, we're all in this together. And when you're, really 30 years down the line in your career and you're really good at what you're doing, just think how good this story will be to all your students.
You're living through history, that's correct. Tony?
I would just say go with the flow. I know I've been on the phone to Lloyd a few times, worried about placements and uni and kids, because I like to write everything down. I like to be in control. I like to be organised. Like that's what. And sometimes you just can't be. So just go with the flow. And yeah, I would say that.
I love that. Thank you. Leanne?
Kind of similar to Tony. I was going to say I've found it much easier to just take each bit as it comes rather than trying to see the whole picture, because like I've come to accept now that it's just not, nobody's got the answers at the minute. So if you just take each week as it comes, and I think also just try and take out of the current situation as much as you can. Like you said before, this hopefully will never happen again. So some of the experiences that we are getting now are going to be invaluable. So I've tried to look at it like that a little bit, really, on placement at least.
Thank you. Anita?
I suppose my top tip would be to take advantage of all the online learning and extra learning, the web chats, the things that we're doing now, the free learning events. Take advantage of it, think outside the box and just go for it and do things that you've never done before. Come and listen to our BAME conference, learn other things, meet other people. And I think what's really got home to me is this idea of being an AHP family and the importance of interprofessional working. And I think it really sounds like that as a family, we need to support each other. So that was the top tip for me, really, is that, come on, let's work together on this. We are one family. And I really, really love that about our professions, that we are a family, aren't we? And we've got to act like a family, and we're going to have fallouts because that's what families have, and that's okay.
Love it. Heather?
Learn to embrace the uncertainty. I think lots of people, want certainty, but just forget it. I mean, I can't give certainty. Nobody can give certainty. Learn to embrace the uncertainty, and you'll be more resilient. And then back to the point about toning down the perfectionism will also help with that.
Absolutely, thank you. Lloyd.
Yeah, I would echo the sentiments regarding interprofessional learning, and it's one of the things that we were hit with last year, but it's something that I'm a really big advocate of. But the other thing that's been mentioned, I've got just three little things. The next thing would be, we do have societies. We've got there's a physio society, an OT society, ODP society, but it'd be nice if there was an AHP society. If the universities perhaps grasp that as well, which would help to bring all of our students together, as we've seen here. And the other thing, my top tip would be, in the words of Bill Withers, lean on me. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It's been mentioned already, but you don't have to deal with these problems on your own, and we're all only human. So you can, as well as your peers, your classmates, you can also don't be afraid to access student services if you need them, and actually ask for help. We do it in practice, and we should be doing it in the university. The staff certainly do it, so the students should be doing it as well. Okay.
I love that, Lloyd. Yes, AHP. Yes, definitely. Carol, now, would you mind finishing for us?
Yeah. So I completely agree with Lloyd and what everyone else has said. Not ashamed to admit, I reached out to student services when I was a student. But Amelia and the rest of my First Steps team will know that I love this phrase, but the only thing that's black and white as a healthcare professional is your anatomy exam. And even then, it's not really, because each person's slightly different. So yeah, get comfortable with the grey. Learn that everyone's different. Each patient will teach you something new. Each experience will teach you something new. And just grab every experience and ask for help when you need it. It makes you a better clinician.
Thank you so much. And on that note, we're going to say thanks for